condenser section also. So you know, this is our little laser tool. Any laser tool will work. I'm going to put it in a clamp. You know, ours doesn't have a very wide beam, so I have to point it down some. I am going to level it from left to right. It's got little level bubbles on top of it. You know, left to right it's level. This way I had to point it down, so obviously level's not a thing there. And I want to set our angle gauge up to where that laser beam goes directly across our center line. I'm going to place a part on there. Okay, we use the top of the mark to locate our dot location, which, you know, we put our hole halfway between this edge and this edge where the angles change. So obviously I'm going to have to either move in a little closer or tip this back further. And now the top of our dot is right, you know, I mean, I haven't measured, but that's not a critical measurement. That's just, it needs to be approximately in the center, and that's good enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a mark at 90-degree increments, because those tubes have to be 90 degrees apart. Actually, and the reason you put marks here at the bottom is so that you can index it the proper degrees. And right here is where I'm going to mark for the drilling. And something else we do, on the reflux section, the tubes come out the front, and so the center of this bell is going to be at this 45-degree increment. Okay, I'm going to mark that, and that is what I call the top dead center mark, which is used for alignment with the other marks that we placed earlier on the 3-inch pipe. Okay, so now I can rotate it 90 degrees, and I verify that I've rotated 90 degrees by the little hash marks I put on. Then I put another mark right here. That's the other drill mark. Okay, now that's the mark bell for the reflux section. Now this one here, this is for the condenser section, which has your two pipes at 90 degrees. So I'm going to mark where they're at, right here. And you're going to have your 1/2-inch outlet, the alcohol outlet pipe, coming off 45 degrees off the right side of the still. Okay, the coil tubes come out the back side of the still on the condenser section. So you know, one will be over here and one over here. Well, if you flip that up and put these to the back side, then over here is where your outlet tube is going to come out. And also, if this is turned around, you know, it's going to be flipped over, and this is going to be your back side. And these are, and right here would be your back center. Well, that means nothing to us, but we want to mark on the top dead center, the front center, which would be 180 degrees from here. This is your two tubes coming out the back. So directly across from them and center of them, we want to get a mark for front dead center for alignment purposes. Okay, this is going to be where your 1/2-inch tube comes out right there. Let's go back the other direction now. There's where we started. This is the center of the back. We need to go 90 degrees. And that'll give us the other tube location. So the finished product, looking at it from the top, you've got two dots 90 degrees apart and a third one 45 degrees over. And on the back, this is directly on the back, is your top dead center alignment mark. Alright, any time you drill a hole, you have to mark it. I'm going to go ahead and show that on these. You see how banged up this is? It's just an old piece of wood I use so we don't tear up the tabletops. Center punch your holes. If you put a good deep punch in there, then it'll help ensure that your drill don't wander when you start drilling. We drill out the holes for the tubing. We're back on the reflux section here, or still on the reflux section. I always clamp it with the hole next to the end I'm going to drill on and perpendicular to the jaws. Got a 1/4 inch drill. When I start drilling, I'm holding the drill here perpendicular to this slanted surface. If you take off at too much of an angle in either direction, then the drill is going to walk up or down that face and move your hole location and make for an ugly solder joint. You also want to be going straight in, so you're going to be perpendicular to the jaw on the vise. Okay. After I drill through, you're going to want to bring the drill straight up while it's running, of course, and there again you want to stay in a perpendicular fashion to the jaw on the vise. And there is what your hole should look like, and I'm going to repeat that process on the next hole. Drilled both the holes now. You can see all the burrs on the inside. I have a pencil grinder with a little stone on it. And I also prep the area around the hole because I solder the tubing in from the inside. After I knock those burrs off, I know some of those burrs have folded over and went back in the hole, so I just kind of run the drill bit through there again to clean the hole out. Next thing I do, I go ahead and prep this inside surface where it's going to be soldered to 3-inch pipe. I take the Scotch-Brite pad and go ahead and prep this inside surface because it's difficult to do that once your coil's soldered in there. It's not impossible to do, but it's a lot easier to do it now. Next thing, we've got steel mesh circles. These have already been cut out. We cut them with the torch and then grind them with the grinding wheel to fit. We make them to where it's a good snug fit, where once they're in place they don't move around on you, or at least that's our goal. It don't always work out perfect, but before I push this in hard, what I'm doing is looking for some location to where the mesh pattern isn't blocking the holes where the tubing has to go through. And sometimes you can't find a happy medium, and in that case we have a punch that we run through the hole and bend the mesh out of the way. In case if you get it where you can't move it out of the way with a drift punch, then you can run the drill back through here and actually drill the mesh. Sometimes you get, just the way the mesh pattern falls, you can get it to where it just falls right over top the hose. I don't think that's going to be the case on this one. Okay, I'm going to grab my wood block so I don't damage the copper. And I'm going to take my 1-inch piece of steel and go ahead and tap that mesh down into the bell. And it's tied all the way down in there now, all the way around. And that piece was cut well because it's not going anywhere. It's in there. Next thing I have a little, this is a centering punch, but it's got a narrow shaft on it. You could also use a small drift punch, would work really well. I'm going to run it through and swaddle it around. This hole here, the copper is going to go through there without any restriction at all. This one here on the other side is going to be a bit of a problem. You can see where I'm hitting, and I'm going to try to bend that out of the way. And it needs to be well out of the way, because if this mesh catches on the side of the tubing while you're trying to go through that hole, it makes it really difficult to get it through there. So and what I've done when I lined this hole up, I apparently rotated the whole thing because now that hole is hitting. And it looks like I'm going to have to do some drilling because when I move it one way, the other one gets blocked. So I'm going to run my drill bit through there and pull it sideways over against that mesh. It's better to spend a little bit extra time making sure you've got a good clear opening than to go to put the tubing in and then have to wrestle with the tubing. I'm going to coat the whole area in the vicinity of where the tubing goes through, because when I'm done there's going to be a puddle of solder around the whole area. And then I come around the other side and I'll just coat a little bit around the hole there. And then I'm going to set that aside and prep the tubing. We have a coil here already made up. And these processes, as far as the mesh goes and the tubing, I'll show you how we do those. They're a separate process. We have these already made up and ready to go down here in the shop. I know that the distance from this surface on the bell to the top of this coil is going to be 6 inches. So 6 inches up, probably right about here, is where the tubing is actually going to be going through. And so, you know, when I made this one up, I made it really a few inches longer than it needed to be. It's good to have an inch or so to spare. Anything more than that, you're wasting material. You know, I'm just going to prep that whole area where the tubing is going to be soldered to the bell. I'm going to run sandpaper around them a little bit. I'm squeezing just as hard as I can squeeze right now. We feed them in. Whichever one is longer of the two, that's one that needs to go in first. Follow the other one through. And you need to keep them both going straight through as much as you can. You don't have to work them too much. You want to get them where they go in without working them too hard, or it'll scar up this section where the customer has to attach his hose. And if it's really rough to push through, you can clamp vice grips here on the end of the tube and pull it through, and that'll keep you from having too much damage. Okay, looks like I'm about 7 inches now, so I need to go another inch. That's probably it right there. Yeah, I'm about 1 inch to the top of the coil. So the next step I'm going to do is clamp this in the vise for soldering. Alright, here we go. I've got the tube in. It's 6 inches down. And I'm going to clamp this. You know, the tubing I'm going to solder first, I want to have directly at the bottom. And then this surface here, I want to have parallel to the ground or level. So I'm going to have to turn that bell about that angle. Depending on the type of bell you get, or depending on how sharp of an angle you have to clamp this thing. Some of them have a more radical slope than others. This one here's got a pretty radical slope on it, so pointing up like that is pretty close to level. If you go over too far this way, your solder is going to run down into the 1.5 inch opening where you've got to solder in another pipe, so that would make rework. And the same way, if you're down this way too far, the solder is going to run out onto this surface here, which has to have a pipe put in it. So you want to get it where you're just almost flat there, where you can puddle your solder around this tube and not have it run where you don't want it to be. Alright, so there, we're clamped in there. It's positioned pretty well. One other thing, you want to have your tubing going through the hole at the angle you drilled it. You know, if you happen to have a bend in your tubing and it's not going, you know, if it's going through at an angle like this, then you're going to have a lot of run through on your out on your 1/4 inch tube. Now I've got it going straight through at the angle the hole was drilled. This surface here is level, and so now we're ready to solder that. And I solder that on the inside. I apply the heat to the outside, and I'm trying to keep most of my heat going onto the 3-inch reducing coupling, and I'm hitting the tubing with it every now and then. Obviously the tubing will heat up a lot quicker than the big 3-inch coupling. And one thing nice about having your flame on the opposite side of where you're soldering, that way you can go ahead and set your solder in there, and as soon as it starts melting, back the flame away. Make sure you get plenty of solder all the way around that tubing. And I'd pretty well guarantee you that if your 3-inch coupling's hot enough to melt the solder, then that 4-inch tubing's going to be hot enough too. It's going to be at a good temperature. Probably the most difficult part about this piece was getting in around that stainless steel mesh. Okay, I've got a good sized puddle in there now, and I'm comfortable that I've got good solder adhesion to both the coupling and the tubing. So no matter what the outside of it looks like, I know I've got a good seal in here. Hopefully the outside will look good. It usually does. Okay, I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, do the other tubing in the same fashion. I've soldered both holes, or both tubes in here. You can see, I hope you can see, we've got a lot of solder all the way around on the inside. We've got plenty of run out. It's not desirable, but on doing these tubings, it's pretty much we found unavoidable. So the next thing I'm going to do is cut the tubing off to the length it needs to be. For the completed still, we come out 1.25 inches. And what I'm going to do here is use a marker. I usually measure from, depending on where you measure from, because that hole's diagonal, it's going to make a pretty big difference on where the cut comes. And so I can stay consistent, I measure from the center of the side out 1.25 inches. Do the same thing here on the other one. What I use to cut them with, you could use a hacksaw. I have a just a little chop saw, pneumatic. I try to cut them, cut the end of the tubing square, and you got to be careful not to go through too far, or you'll mar up the shaft there on your 3-inch coupling. There's some solder that's going to have to be ground off there, obviously, which I'm going to leave this now and go onward, and it'll be up to the person doing the finishing to clean that solder off. The next thing we're going to do, we have to solder this onto the 3-inch tube that we made previously. I'm going to look inside there and make sure I didn't get any solder run up in there that's going to cause me any grief putting that tubing on. We've got another die grinder with a carburetor bit. You gotta be careful with these. They really take a bite. I've already finished the inside of this earlier before I soldered it, but the heat kind of causes it to what appears to be corrosion again. I kind of give it another quick brushing. Next I do is flush it up. I'm going to set this aside. Alright, this is the 3-foot piece of 3-inch pipe with the female adapters on it that we completed earlier. Again, I know about how far down to go. If you're not real familiar with it, you should put a mark on there. You can either measure this guy, good coat of flux. I'll turn this up where I've got top dead center showing. You can still see I still have the mark I put on there earlier for top dead center. I pretty much sanded it off under the flux here, but it shows up down here. That's the reason I made the mark full length. Before you put this on, I usually look down through the hole with this thing square, get it where it's good and straight, and get it centered up with your opening there. I've got everything pretty well centered up. And sometimes what'll happen from having clamped this bell, it'll knock it out around. I've got this mark in line with this mark. I'm going to take it back out of the clamp. I've got my block of wood here. I'm just going to bring it down like that. Double check my marks are lined up good. So now it's time to solder that. Alright, I've soldered the reducing coupling onto the end of the reflux section. The only thing left to do